One of the less pleasant facts of life we all face is that at some point it's inevitable that we'll experience grief in one form or another. Today I'm sitting down at my podcast desk with my husband as we discuss this topic. Not as experts, but as two people who've experienced some grief of our own and are learning how to better walk alongside others as they grieve. Welcome here, sweet friends.
Hi there.
I wish you all could see us right now at this desk. We're trying something new with our mic, and we have pillows propped up all around us. So it's a hot day, and we're smothered in pillows. We're doing it for you, people.
It may be nap time soon.
So for those of you who missed it, I introduced my husband, Erwin, here on the podcast on episode 7. You might want to go back and listen to that and catch up. I sort of tricked him when we did that one, didn't I?
Yeah, you did.
Yeah, I did. I told him, let's try out this mic and see how it works for the two of us. And then I said, let's just do this.
Kind of nasty.
So that podcast is very casual. We talk about all kinds of things like how we met and our engagement stories and things like that.
My speech impediment. Yeah.
That's right. So guess what?
Tell me.
So I just checked the analytics this morning and found out that podcast, How We Met, and our engagement story is the most listened to podcast.
Wow.
And I had more comments on that podcast than any other one I've done, and people want more of you.
Well, okay then.
So here he is, and this time we did sort of plan this podcast out, thought about a few questions ahead of time, and we'll see how this goes. So the topic of grief and loss isn't the normal easygoing conversation that I tend to gravitate to, but it's something that actually the two of us talk about an awful lot.
We do.
So Erwin is currently in the last year, finishing up his master's degree in chaplaincy and spiritual care. So I get the advantage of hearing the best quotes from a lot of books he's reading, as well as reading the final papers for the courses he writes before he sends them in.
But do you really enjoy that part?
Sometimes I groan a little bit because I think, another long paper to wade through.
Sometimes I can't even understand it.
But I have actually really learned a lot reading those papers. And one of them actually even made me laugh right out loud. So, I think if you can write a master's degree paper and make the prof laugh, you got to get an A then.
Well, you would think so, yeah. And that was pretty funny. We were talking about, I was writing about Christian history. At one point, they baptized people naked.
And he wrote something in it about, I'm glad that they've changed that practice. And I don't even remember how he said it, but I'm reading along this very serious paper, and then I read this one sentence, and I just burst out laughing. So thank goodness history has changed.
Yes, it is. Thank goodness.
In the baptism department. Anyway. So I thought that as we started out this conversation, it might be helpful to tell a little bit about our own grief stories. I talked in episode 1 about my mom and her journey with dementia and eventually passing away. That's definitely a huge part of my grief journey. But also what I didn't talk about then is that my dad passed away when I was 28 years old. And his diagnosis of a neurological disease happened when I was 16. I realized then that grief begins at the point before someone actually passes away, right?
Exactly. And there's a word for that. They call it anticipatory grief. And it's grief that you have when you're looking ahead to an impending loss of something or someone. And it's hard because you dealt with that with both of your parents, both your dad for all those years, and then your mom, we dealt with that together.
So clearly the loss of my mom and dad were huge losses in my life. And I've also lost a lot of other precious people in my family other than my parents. Both my grandmas have passed away since we got married, and two of my aunts and a dear, dear friend and others. Like, But what are some of the big losses in your life?
My mother had cancer in 2017, and she went into hospice and was there for about 4 months, and then passed away in September of 2017. And that was kind of rough, and because she wasn't very old, and it was way too early. And also, I lost a friend and a boss who I had worked for 13 years, and all of a sudden he died of cancer, and that kind of, it changed me a bit.
So your mom's experience was the first time we'd ever seen hospice in action, and that aspect, and watching it, made a huge impact on your life. So tell me a little bit about that.
Well, to be honest, that was the first time I ever really knew what hospice was. And it was an amazing experience to see Mom in a place where she was so well taken care of. They managed her pain very, very well. But the point of it wasn't to extend her life, but to rather make her comfortable while she was still living. And I went there, and this was a long ways away from here, so I was only able to be there for about a week. And I was just amazed at all the volunteers and the staff, and how passionate they were about their work and how kind they were. And it really made me interested in looking into that here. And so I walked into our own hospice in town and said, "Hey, do you guys want volunteers?" And of course they said yes.
Yes, we found out that they are very excited when people have a passion for that and want to learn more. And that actually is what led him eventually to take this course in chaplaincy and spiritual care.
Exactly.
So that was the start of it.
It started with hospice, and then from there, I wanted to learn more, so that's why I enrolled in this chaplaincy and spiritual care master's degree.
So one of the things I've realized myself as I've gone through life and experienced over 50 years of life is that grief and the stages of grief is something that can be experienced over things that aren't limited to just the loss of life. So talk to me about that a little bit.
Well, when I began volunteering with the hospice in our town, I soon became involved in a grief support group, and I learned so much in that group. I was supposed to be the facilitator, but I learned so much from the men and women who were in that group. And they talked about losing a husband or a wife or whatever, but then it got complicated, because then they would lose a dog after that, or they'd lose another pet, or a job, or divorce would happen in their families or whatever. And so it's way more complicated than just losing a loved one to death. It can be all sorts of losses, and we grieve each of them.
So grief can also be over like a loss of a relationship. Even if the person is still alive, you will go through the same process emotionally, processing that as you will.
Totally. Yes.
And that's something that I just didn't even realize. So let's talk a little bit about what we personally have learned from our experiences with grief. So what would you say that you have learned from your experiences of grief?
We all grieve in our own way. When the boss died, I thought I was okay, because I didn't realize how close I was to him. But then I get to church, and I try and sing some song, and I choke up, and I was like, "Where'd that come from?" But I realized that was part of the grief of losing this man that I'd known and respected for many years. When my mother died, at the funeral, I was dry-eyed, and brother was a mess, and I cried at different times, and so we all grieve differently, and the stages of grief hit us at different times in different ways, and that's okay. We have to be okay with that.
I think the thing that I realized is, no, here we're talking about grief, and how do we talk about grief without crying? I realized that grief changes you. It will permanently change you. And my dad's death turned me into a weeper.
Yes, it did.
It did. And it wasn't something I wanted. I didn't want that. And I was so embarrassed about it. I would go to church. Church was really the place that brought back so many memories of him for me.
Yeah.
And the songs would just take me back in time, those old hymns. And I'd think about him every song about heaven, I would picture him. And I remember being so embarrassed and just sitting in church wishing, I wish these songs didn't make me cry like this. Like, what is wrong with me? Why can't I stop? And until one day I realized I don't have to. This is who I am now.
Exactly. And it's okay.
This is okay.
Mm-hmm.
And I have just realized I love to laugh at every chance I can.
I think we all know that.
It's my favorite. One of my favorite things every day is to find things to laugh about. But I also realize that grief has also made tears come very easy for me. And I have over time learned that that's just who I am.
Mm-hmm.
And that's okay. And people, it doesn't seem to bother other people. And I've learned to just let it happen. They dry up quite quickly.
And she's back to laughing again.
And you move on.
Exactly.
But grief does change you. And I learned, even though at the time you might not think you're going to be able to live through it.
You will.
You will.
You will.
You
Yeah.
will.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the other really helpful thing that someone told me was that there is no wrong way to go through grief.
Yeah.
Now, there are stages of grief, right?
Yeah. Yes, there are.
So talk to me about the stages of grief.
Yeah, and many of you have probably seen this, and it's all over the internet. And there's a well-known author by the name of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who passed away recently, and who wrote a couple books about the stages of dying and then the stages of grief. And the stages are denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and eventually acceptance. But we need to be careful with these stages, since even in her book, she talks about the fact that the stages aren't always linear, and they don't always line up exactly the same way. And this is the order you go through. And once you finish one, you check it off and you go to the next one. I like to think of it more like a stew. It's all in there, and it's going to probably all happen to you at some point. You might go through the anger part later, and it might be fast, or it might be longer, or it might be, you may circle back to different stages. But it's important to know these stages as you help others, because it kind of helps you realize that grief looks different at different parts of the stages, and you need to accept that.
And I think the thing is too that I realized grief isn't something you go through all the stages, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Now I'm done.
Right.
Grief is over now. I'm done with that.
If only.
It doesn't end.
No.
It doesn't have an end date, but it does change over time, and it can pop up unexpectedly. Like
Totally. Yes, exactly.
That's just the way it is, and it's very normal.
Yeah, in the grief support group that I facilitated, there was several people in there whose grief and whose loss had been a long time ago. But some days they would come in and the intensity was like it happened yesterday. Other times it tends to go down, and so we need to accept it and realize that we are walking through grief. We are, hopefully becoming stronger as we go through. But we can't just say the grief didn't happen. We will always love that person. We will always miss them.
Something else someone told me a long time ago that has served me so well was that your body doesn't forget.
Oh my, yes.
And so often, like on the anniversary of perhaps their passing, or an anniversary of some other special event with that person, you might find yourself thinking of them more, and the intensity of the grief seems much greater then.
Mm-hmm.
And that is your body's way of remembering. And that is so normal. When I was told that, it was such a huge relief, because I kept thinking, wait, what is happening? Why does this feel like it just happened yesterday?
Yeah.
And that really was very, very helpful to me. So we're going to transition this conversation into how to help people who are grieving or hurting. But before we do, I thought it would be nice for each of us to share something that has been meaningful for us in our own journeys of grief. And they're writings that we've found that other people have wrote, but seem to articulate what we've experienced and what we would like to encourage you with. So why don't you start with yours, and
Sure.
Where did you find it?
I found this when I was leading the grief support group. Somebody gave it to me. I'm not even sure where they had it all printed out already. And apparently someone on Reddit wrote this or wrote a plea and saying, my friend just died, I don't know what to do. And this older gentleman responded, and so I'm just going to read that for you. It's kind of long, but it's well worth it. All right, here goes. I'm old. What that means is that I've survived so far, and a lot of people I've known and loved did not. I wish I could say you get used to people dying. I never did. I don't want to. It tears a hole through me whenever someone I love dies, no matter the circumstances. But I don't want it to not matter. I don't want it to be something that just passes. My scars are a testament to the love and the relationship I had for and with that person. And if a scar is deep, so is the love. So be it. Scars are a testament to life. Scars are a testament that I can love deeply and live deeply and be cut or even gouged, and that I can heal and continue to live and continue to love. And the scar tissue is stronger than the original flesh ever was. Scars are a testament to life. Scars are only ugly to people who can't see. As for grief, you'll find it comes in waves. When the ship is first wrecked, you're drowning with wreckage all around you. Everything floating around you reminds you of the beauty and the magnificence of the ship that was and is no more. And all you can do is float. You find some piece of wreckage and you hang on for a while. Maybe it's some physical thing. Maybe it's a happy memory or a photograph. Maybe it's a person who is also floating. For a while, all you can do is float, stay alive. In the beginning, the waves are 100 feet tall and crash over you without mercy. They come 10 seconds apart and don't even give you time to catch your breath. All you can do is hang on and float. After a while, maybe weeks, maybe months, you'll find the waves are still 100 feet tall, but they come further apart. When they come, they still crash all over you and wipe you out. But in between, you can breathe, you can function. You never know what's going to trigger the grief. It might be a song, a picture, a street intersection, the smell of a cup of coffee. It can be just about anything, and the waves come crashing. But in between waves, there's life. Somewhere down the line, and it's different for everybody, you'll find that the waves are only 80 feet tall, or 50 feet tall. And while they still come, they come further apart. You can see them coming. An anniversary, a birthday, a Christmas, a landing at the airport. You can see it coming for the most part and prepare yourself. And when it washes over you, you know that somehow you will, again, come out the other side. Soaking wet, sputtering, still hanging on to some tiny piece of wreckage, but you'll come out. Take it from an old guy. The waves never stop coming. And somehow, you don't really want them to, but you'll learn that you'll survive them. And other waves will come, and you'll survive them too. And if you're lucky, you'll have lots of scars from lots of loves and lots of shipwrecks.
Oh, I love that. I love that. I will try very hard to find that online and link it for you in the show notes. Mm-hmm. And as Erwin was reading that, I was remembering that he wrote an article that I have on my blog, Twinkle Lights for a Grieving Soul. He wrote it at Christmas one year. Right. I will link that one as well. What I would like to read for you today, I found through somebody's Instagram post one day who linked this up, and it touched me deeply. It's actually a series of tweets by a lady named Claire McIntosh. So Claire McIntosh, if you ever hear this, thank you. So this is what it says. My son died 14 years ago today. If you're struggling with the loss of a loved one, I have some promises for you. I promise this will not always be the first thing you think about in the morning. I promise you won't always lie awake at night sobbing until you can't breathe. I promise you will not always feel that hard lump in your throat like grief is a rock that cannot be moved. It can. I promise those waves of grief that knock you off your feet will become smaller, less violent. You will be able to stand and let them wash around you, not over you. I promise walking won't always feel like you're dragging your legs through treacle. I don't know what that word is, actually.
Sounds bad.
But anyway, it sounds muddy. I don't know. Anyway, breathing won't always be something you have to remember to do. You will do both these things effortlessly again. I promise you won't always be winded by someone else's happiness, their social media updates and photographs. You will smile and feel glad that they have something so special and that you had it once too. I promise you'll be able to say their name without crying, that you will share a memory and feel wistful, sad, but not broken. I promise you won't always have to take the day off work on anniversaries because you are unable to function. You will find something special to mark it, or you will treat it like any other day, and either is okay. I promise it won't always hurt like this. 14 years ago, a woman made me these promises, and I didn't believe her. I sobbed silently as she told me how the years had healed her, and I thought she was wrong. My grief was different. You'll think I'm wrong too, but in 14 years' time, or 12, or 5, or 9, you will realize the rock of grief in your throat has washed away, and you will make these promises to someone else. Until then, be gentle on yourself. Grief can't be rushed, and this is a particularly hard year in which to suffer a loss. Much love to you. I'll try to find that and link it to you as well. Now, we have been we've planned all of everything of this podcast up until this point. And then we said, okay, now let's wing it when we get to this stage. So we'll see how winging it goes.
Oh, yeah, we'll see. I'm scared.
But what we want to do is talk about a little bit ways to help people who are hurting. It might be grief or a friend who is hurting about something, whatever reason. And it's funny. I thought of this because a few months ago, I was talking with a lady who's just a few years younger than I am. Mm-hmm. And she told me that she and her husband had just lost their very first person. I was shocked at that. And one of the things I've talked about a lot is at my age, what am I, 55? I always forget.
Yes. No.
Yes, I'm 55, almost 55.
Yes.
I'm always surprised when there are people much older than me that still have their parents. Mm-hmm. It shocks me. And sometimes I think, wow, you got to have them for a long time.
Just a little bit jealous, maybe?
Just a little bit jealous, yes. But I do think, the way our life has gone, we have experienced a lot of losses. Mm-hmm. And, but funny enough, is that the word? Funny enough? I still find myself at a loss sometimes to know how to help people. Mm-hmm. So we're going to talk about that a little bit. So what's your first piece of advice?
The first thing I would say is don't have too many pat answers. If you go in, because of all the stages that we just talked about, if you have the same thing you say every time, and we all have to have something because we don't know what to say, so we have a pat answer, but don't expect that everybody's going to respond the same way to the same thing. What you need to do most of all, and this is more with people that you're with face to face, is listen to them. Let them tell their story. Even if they told you the story 4 times already, listen, let them get it out because they need to get it out, and just listen.
That brings up something that's my pet peeve. I do have some in life, don't I?
A few.
I do have a few pet peeves, and even as I researched the subject of grief, one of the most Googled asked questions is, what do I say? What do I write in a note to someone who's grieving, or what should I say? And I think one of the things is I always thought that since I've gone through so many losses in my life, you would think that I would be better at knowing what to say. But there's something that always makes me hesitate. And it's because so many people say, don't say this, don't say this, don't say this, don't. So I thought I had a good thing to say.
You did.
And what I often say is, I'm so very sorry for your loss, or something like that. I thought that was something that I could say that shouldn't be offensive. But lo and behold, just 2 weeks ago, I saw someone ranting passionately on social media that you should never say, I'm sorry for your loss. And I just threw my hands up. I'm like, now what do I do?
I would imagine that person was going through the anger phase. Just a guess. I'm no shrink, but that's my guess.
Yeah.
It's about showing you care. And we're going to get the words wrong sometimes. But if we show that we care, people want to be cared for. And that's worth more than any correct words. One thing that we do need to be careful about is coming up with, well, they're in a better place, or it's good that they're gone because they were suffering so much. And that kind of stuff. Be very, 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 very careful with that, because while it may be true, it's not helpful.
And I remember that, like, within not very long after my mom had died, someone had said that. And I knew that they meant well. And I think that's the thing. Like, you have to give each other lots of grace. I knew that the comment coming was from a heart of care. But, even though my mom had dementia, the loss still hurt.
Still stung, big time.
And 5 minutes after she passed away, I don't want someone to say, but, she's lovely to know she's in a better place. I wasn't quite at that stage quite yet.
No. It's not kind.
Yeah. So, but I do think too, one of the things, it does make a difference how close you are to the friends.
Oh, for sure.
And, how close your relationship is, and how well you know them will help you to know how to help them more. Mm-hmm. And I think one of the things I've heard over and over again is when someone has suffered a great loss for whatever reason, the way you are processing it and all the emotions, your brain is very foggy.
It's very, very common to have brain fog.
Yes.
Yeah,
and so when someone says, how can I help you? More often than not, they won't be able to articulate in any way, shape, or form how to help. They don't know what kind of help they need. So if you can look around and think of things, that is the best gift of all. Mm-hmm. And I've asked people, I like to ask people what they do or what they give, and some of the ideas are meals, mm-hmm. of course. And I remember when we went to my farmhouse after my mom passed away, the farmhouse where I grew up in, there was a steady stream of people bringing food, baked goods, meat and cheese platters, crackers, cheese, all that kind of stuff that was so nice to have around. When the house is full of people, then the pressure isn't on one person to think, oh no, what are we going to eat now?
Exactly, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And another thing is when my dad passed away, we had just started going to the church we go to now. Not a lot of people knew us. Frankly, they didn't even know my dad died.
No.
So there weren't any gifts or any words or cards or anything, except some of our dear friends gave us a book. And inscribed in it, it was my utmost for his highest.
That's right, yes.
In memory of my dad. I still love that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And there are resources that are helpful. If the person is a reader, we have some books we're going to link in the show notes. If you want to go online, there's resources there. There's a neat website called What's Your Grief, and they have tons and tons of articles and all kinds of information there that's quite helpful. But more than that, if you've been grieving for a while and you've been telling your story over and over again, and sometimes you just need to talk to somebody else, look for a local hospice or place where there's a grief support group. If you can find something like that and have other people to talk to, that'd be really, really helpful.
So this was a bit of a hard conversation today, kind of a serious one. But come on over to Instagram and let me know what kind of topics you would like for me and my husband to chat about. We would love to know that. And as always, thank you so much for listening, following, downloading, rating, and reviewing this podcast. Every single little thing helps it grow, and I appreciate it so much. So thank you. Have a great day, and toodaloo.